Oftentimes I find myself checking the market to see that things have gone crazy. Cards like Forbidden Droplets are almost $200, and other cards that were really high before have almost bottomed out in value to the point of no return. How do you know whether or not a card is going to be worth a ton and you should hold on to it for future gains, or if you should cut your losses and move it while it's high to make a profit? Well, today we're going to start the new series on the channel called Buy or Sell, where we take a look at certain cards I'd personally buy now at the price they're at, and other cards I'd sell based on values, likely reprints, metagame use, and other various factors. This is Buy or Sell. Welcome into Buy or Sell, the first inaugural edition of the series, and I'm pretty excited about it because we've been doing the market watches for a while, and I do feel like that's fun and enjoyable to look at the market and get an informative look, but sometimes to have a bit more of an engaging discussion to sort of talk about and be like, what should we do? You know, where should we look at putting our money? What should I sell? If I have this card that's like $150, should I move it now or should I wait because it's going to go up even more? And same with when do you want to play a card? And it's easy to talk about it with the market, but I thought it'd be a cool idea to take a series, like a weekly or bi-weekly series, and sort of look at trends of cards, where they're at price-wise, and whether or not I personally would buy or sell. Just as a caveat, nothing you see in this video is intended as financial advice. I'm pretty much giving my opinion and perspective. Whether you choose to act on that is up to you. I just certainly don't want anyone to go out and make decisions without giving it full consideration, because my opinion is just one of many, and it's very possible that other people may feel differently about it. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this video. This is Buy or Sell, and we're going to start off by taking a look at some of the cards that we have going up. We're going to start things off with Forbidden Droplet from Rise of the Duelist. We're not going to talk about the Ultimate Rare for the sake of this video, but surely if you have them, you know, they're probably just going to hold value over time. It's an extremely good card, and those ulti staples just tend to go up over time. This is almost a year and a half old from Rise of the Duelist and is a metagame staple if you have access to it. It shuts down almost everything, and it's a really, really good card that definitely warrants a higher price point. However, the card is worth more now than it was even when it came out and was at its peak, despite the fact that we know a reprint is on the horizon. Brothers of Legend, which releases about a month from now in early December, is going to have this card. We don't know whether or not it's going to be a secret or an ultra, whether or not it's going to be short printed or commonly printed, and there are various factors that go into that. But what are we looking at here? Are we talking about it being a short print secret rare and being somewhere around like $80 to $90, or a commonly printed secret rare and being closer to $40 to $50? If it is, and it's the same rarity but just with a different stamp in the sense that it doesn't say Rise of the Duelist, to think this card's going to stay 150, 170 is kind of absurd. It would likely tank a significant amount, maybe going down to say 80 to 90 if not more, and that is all dependent on the actual allocation of Droplet in the set and whether or not it's easy to get. With that being said though, my consensus on this one personally is sell. Forbidden Droplets right now is at an all-time high, crazy price, and it's getting closer and closer to the ulti as we go along, but we know a reprint is on the horizon. I'm selling my Droplets, unless you're going to a YCS in January, at which point this card will be out, but you are taking the gamble on accessibility. You could be losing out on a ton of money on this if you picked them up recently, or if you've had them for a while and just want to cash in, put that money towards other cards. I do see this card falling to around $100 at the minimum once a reprint comes out, so there's no reason to think that you wouldn't want to sell now. The only reason I'd say keep them is if, you know, you are going to be playing competitively and do anticipate using it, and you got them for a much cheaper price, and you've basically gotten your value out of it, in which case, sure, hold it. But if you're asking me, I personally have sold my Droplets, and I would recommend doing the same if you're not, you know, immediately going to be using it in a competitive event, because you could get a significant return on this now versus what will likely be a drop of about $50 a copy on average once the reprint does come out. Next up on the list, we've got Harpy's Feather Storm. Harpy's Feather Storm from Duelist Saga is around $15 to $16, and this card I talked about in a video a while back when it was $2 or $3 and said this is a great buy because it has a ton of potential to go up. It's basically a full board negate that's very easy to activate, and with decks like Lyrilusk and Fluandereeze seeing play now, it's more viable than ever. That being said, it does have two other prints, one being a common and one being a super, and the Duelist Saga printing of this card has hit what I think is a peak. I don't necessarily think it's going to hold at that $15 price forever, especially because it is still kind of a niche card that is not seeing play in a lot of Tier 1 decks. You could probably sell this now and cash in if you picked them up when they were like 2 or 3, or even if you picked them up at 5 to 7, you're making a little bit more than triple your value back depending on what you get before fees. It could be a good opportunity to cash in. especially if you don't care about rarity, or if you just anticipate playing this down the road. Floowandereeze right now is a really hyped deck that isn't quite tier 1 yet. They do get more support in Battle of Chaos, and at that point this card could become a lot more viable, but I do think there is a ceiling on the trap itself, and we're already starting to see, as it's hit a peak and continues to sell, people are starting to list them just a little bit cheaper, and that trickle-down effect does sort of happen, especially as we come out of the holiday season. Next up, Rise of the Mega Monarch has to be on the sell list because of the absolute absurdity of this price. This card for the longest time was like $4, and then it hit like $16.20 when Floowandereeze got announced, and then it doubled over the past, couple months, and then when Burst of Destiny hit, this just surged, with it going as high as $75 even for some of the Mega Pack copies, before finally settling out a little bit after the TCG Players sale. I have to think this card is on Konami's radar. Every Mega Monarch has been reprinted up to this point, except Ryza, and I don't know whether or not they slot this into Brothers of Legend, or if they slot this into the Ghost from the Past set that's coming up, but this card will get a reprint sooner rather than later, and if you don't care about rarity, you could make a really solid chunk of change on this, selling it at $65.70. Looking at the historical value of reprints such as Theastalos the Mega Monarch, which was seeing play, and even Caius back in the day, they were much higher. When the reprint came out, they dipped significantly before settling at a somewhat decent price, but really kind of hitting that low point. The Stalos was high. When Ghost from the Past came out, it got reprinted as an Ultra in there, and now even the highest rarity version of it is very affordable. If you're not playing Floowandereeze and you have these Rises laying around, I would sell them sooner rather than later, simply because they are not going to stay this high the minute a reprint comes out, especially with two different secret rare variants. Obviously, the Duelist Alliance one is going to be more desired by most people because it's the original print, but I do think unless you're dead set on keeping this, and even then, selling this at $65 and then waiting till the reprint comes out and picking it back up $20-25 cheaper, which is where it'll likely settle, could be a really good reward for you if you're not immediately using it to play in your current meta decks. Destiny Hero Dasher is wild at $23 to $30 depending on whether or not you have first edition or unlimited. I used the Power of the Duelist one as an example, but the commons are very, very similar in price, so realistically this is applicable to all of them. Dasher is a card that for the longest time was considered basically unusable unless you were playing casual decks, and with the announcement of Destiny Hero Destroy Phoenix Enforcer, it got a ton of hype, and the fact that it hasn't had a print in almost, I think, 12 years definitely contributed towards its surging price. But $23 to $29 for a card that for the longest time was less than $1 and is already being talked about as something that may not even be the best part of a Destiny Hero engine. People are looking towards Plasma, people are looking in other directions. I just think Dasher right now is never going to be as high as it is for these non-holo rarities. Obviously, the Ultimate Rare will have a different sort of argument because Power of the Duelist is so old. There's a huge novelty, a huge collector's market for those old Ultimate Rares, and if it does continue to see play, the Ultis will likely continue to rise over time. We've seen that historically with any card that is played, especially a hero, especially a collectible card. But for these non-foil versions, I would sell any that you have. I found some in my bulk. I listed them around $22 and moved them almost immediately. If you're willing to go a few dollars under the going rate, they are selling like crazy right now. If you're not going to be using this card and you have extras lying around, this is the best time to move them because there's no way that it stays that high, but I do think it's going to be a good card to move before an inevitable reprint, even if it's a common or a super or something in the upcoming OTS with Fusion Destiny as an Ultimate Rare. This card is at a peak, and I would move it now because I do think it is inevitably going to start falling once anybody that wants them has their copies, and if a reprint does bring a higher rarity version, whether it's a super or a secret or an ultra, it is absolutely going to make these commons and rares relatively worthless. Chimeratech Fortress Dragon has seen a ton of hype as well with the Cyber Strike structure deck, and I did some research on this about a month and a half ago. In early October, late September, this card was selling for around $2 to $3. All copies of Chimeratech Fortress Dragon have gone up in price as a result of scarcity, but I would argue Cyber Dragon as a whole isn't even doing all that much. It's a decent rogue option, but it's definitely not meta, and these cards, seeing what looks to be almost a 5 times price increase if you would pick these up cheap, you could now move these and make a pretty good return on that investment. Duelist Saga is one that some people love, some people hate. Personally, a huge fan of the rarity, but I understand that it's not for everyone. What I would advise is that you basically look at your, collection and whether or not this is something you anticipate playing. Fortress Dragon is a neat card, but Cyber Dragon as a whole is just not anything crazy in the meta, and I don't mean that as a disrespect to anyone that's a huge fan of Cyber Dragons. It's just the deck is fine, it can do some cute stuff, but it does lose hard, and the better the deck is, the easier it is to beat, because you can just splash a Mega Fleet Dragon, or even a duplicate copy of Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon to play against it. I just think this card as a whole is really hot right now, has gotten a lot of demand, and has gone up over time. And if you pick these up in the $2 to $3 range, and you can sell them now for, like I said, almost quadruple that, it's definitely a good move, in my opinion. Alright, moving on to cards I'm personally interested in buying now, and some I've already started to pick up. Evil Twins Trouble Sunny is the first one that comes to mind. At a current value of around 8 to 10, this feels like a card that will easily double in the next, let's say, 5 to 6 months, if we're throwing a number out there. Historically speaking, Genesis Impact saw a bunch of the Live Twin cards go up steadily over time, with both Live Twin links that are actually relevant and highly played being anywhere between $17 to $22, depending on which one we're talking about, and the collector rares being even higher. While Burst to Destiny is a really good set that's already getting difficult to find, a lot of the ultra rares leave something to be desired, meaning the ones that don't will typically appreciate well. If you look at Lightning Overdrive, for example, with Live Twin Keys to Kill Frost when it was around $2 to $3, it was talked about heavily as a card to go after, and now it's around 10 to 11, meaning it has done well for itself historically. Now, while Trouble Sunny does have a higher entry-level cost, it's also a really, really powerful card for the deck, basically being the card that takes the deck from good as a casual, perhaps low rogue status, to being a genuine competitive threat to certain metagame decks. You could look at the Starlight Rare version if you have big pockets and don't really care about the implications of that kind of money, but overall, $8 to $10 at this, I wouldn't go ahead and say buy a bunch of them, but if it's a card you anticipate playing in the future, buying it now at 8 is not the worst place to get in, especially because I do expect it will age well. Moving on to the next card, Dimension Shifter. This one you've almost missed the boat on if you haven't picked it up already. It sat around $2 to $3 for the longest time, almost a year if not more, before going up to 4 or 5 and still being talked about by many competitive players as a card to get. Dimension Shifter as a whole is really good as a hand trap and just gets better as people find more ways to use it, and as more decks come out that can really maximize its potential. It's 7 to 8, but again, we've seen hand traps like Nibiru, which was in the same tin, go as high as $30, which is its current price, and I'm not saying Dimension Shifter is necessarily going to get there, but unless a reprint is on the horizon, which doesn't seem to be the case, there's no reason to think this card's going to go anywhere but up. As the decks come out that can utilize it better, Dimension Shifter starts to see more play, and if you don't have one now, picking up a playset for around $20 could be a decent option for you. If not, you could see this card hit as high as $13 to $15 in the next couple months, and you'll be paying a lot more for something when you could get in on it now. Ice Jade Tremora from Burst of Destiny is another card that's already seen some people start to go after it, settling around $2 to $3 pretty strongly on release weekend. It's now up to about $3 to $5, and the sales rate is high. People have been going after it as it is a generically decent card that acts as an extender for water decks, although it does minus you inherently. We know there's more Ice Jade cards coming out in Battle of Chaos, and whether or not the deck will be playable as a fully functional deck is unknown, but they definitely have potential as an engine for different water builds, and we know there's a lot more water cards coming out. As a secret rare in a core set that, like I said, is already becoming a little bit difficult to find, Ice Jade Tremora has plenty of room to move up, could potentially double in price over the next couple months if people continue to chase after it and more water decks start to get prevalence. Melody of Awakening Dragon is another one that you had an opportunity to get in on around $2 about 6 months ago. It has continued to rise, with the first edition copies being even higher than this $5 to $8 price point I'm showing here, but there are still plenty of unlimiteds available, and this is the highest rarity version of the card. It's really good, doesn't have a hard once per turn, and is extremely useful in decks like Blue Eyes, which, while not meta relevant currently, is definitely a fan favorite and does get a lot of support in Battle of Chaos. As the Blue Eyes stuff comes closer, people might be starting to look towards things to pick up in the deck, and as we've seen historically, when new cards come out, things that were less accessible or cheaper before tend to rise in price for a value displacement, and this card is one that could easily fall into that category. We've seen Melody of Awakening Dragon go up before. It did dip once Legendary Collection Kaiba got a rewave in stores for a brief time, but I do think picking this up between the $5 to $8 mark is definitely a solid investment if it's a card you plan on playing. If you want it in the highest rarity and want a card that's going to hold its long-term value better than in the other printings, this is a good opportunity to get in, and I would say you could definitely do well picking up a playset of this around the $15 price point. Dogmatica Punishment is around $4 to $5. I've said on record before, I think it's a really nice secret rare and probably one of the nicest from the Megatins. It's a really good card that sees play in a ton of anti-meta and trap-based decks, but it just gets better with time. People are going to be playing Dogmatica Punishment for a while due to its incredible, versatility, being able to mill stuff from the extra deck, and just being able to out a problem card in a way that can generate you advantage as well. I do think when the super rare came out in the OTS, it hit as high as $10, and then once this reprint was announced, it did drop. Once this card sort of has a chance to exist in rotation for a bit with the Megatins no longer being printed, which will probably be a couple months, people will likely start to chase after this, and we've seen a lot of foil variants from Megatins in the past couple of years go up over time. I don't think Punishment is going to suddenly become like a $20 secret, but it could very well double in price, and if you want to get it now while it's cheap, you could definitely benefit from doing so. And lastly, for my buy recommendations for this week, Marincess Wave is a card that has long since been very cheap out of Rising Rampage. It's always been regarded as a really, really good card, being essentially a infinite impermanence you can activate from the hand if you control a Marincess monster, but one that also provides blanket immunity to your Marincess monsters across the board. But it was never really searchable, and the new card we got announced for Battle of Chaos, the Link 3 Marincess, does allow you to search this now, which has led to people going after it pretty quick. Does have a rare printing from last year's Megatin, so it is accessible, cheap, but the ultra rare will likely be the one that sees the biggest spike in value, as Marincess is a deck that people really like, and we've seen it happen with the Adignister cards already start to get some hype for their respective higher rarity variants. There's no reason to think that this wouldn't be the same, especially because Rising Rampage is really regarded as a terrible set outside of Starlights that is starved for value. $4 to $5 is a little bit more than I'd like to be paying on this, but I also think given the potential of Marincess as a deck, you could definitely benefit from picking these up. And that's going to do it for today's buy or sell video. I do apologize, the format's a little bit all over the place. I think as we move forward with these, I'll get a little bit more comfortable with them, and it'll be easier to sort of have a natural flow, but I wanted to make sure to get the reasons out there behind these picks that I'm making, and let you know that I'm sort of in on all of them, but obviously at the end of the day, it's really up to you to decide whether or not you think it's a smart buy, a smart sell, and it's your cards, your money, so you make the best choices for you. This is just sort of meant to be fun, and I honestly look to see what you guys think of your opinions in the comments down below. You agree or disagree with my take on these? Would you sell these other cards high? Would you buy these other cards low? And let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you on the next buy and sell.